The Honourable Chester Borrows.
Mr Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak on this bill, and with a change of roles, it's the first opportunity I've had to speak this term in the House, and I'm pleased it's on this bill, having previously had some responsibility for the bill in another role. The bill seeks to correct some anomalies and to fix some concerns that have been identified in recent times. And I want to start with one in particular. People will remember the Irina Asher investigation from Piha Beach a number of years ago, and the result of that coronial inquiry has thrown up some anomalies and some unfairnesses around some people who were involved with respect to that case. And so this bill seeks to make a change with respect to that. And I'm speaking specifically around the coronial inquest, where some negative comment was made by the coroner in respect of a witness on the night, someone who sought to give assistance to Ms Asher, and that is Bobby Carroll. What happened was that the coroner made some comment around the ramifications of actions that Ms Carroll took, speculated on what could have happened if other actions had been taken, and in the end, of course, the chief coroner came to a position where we needed to change this law to make sure that if any comment was going to be made that might be negative on the impacts of a witness or someone who had previously appeared or had some connection with a case, then the coroner must identify what those comments are and to make them known to that person before they are released publicly, and give that person the opportunity to be able to speak on them. And I know that this has been a terrible concern for that particular family, and Ms Carroll particularly, her partner and the people who supported her, and it's unfortunate that no apology has ever been given. For instance, she wasn't given the opportunity to be represented or advised of her opportunity to be represented within the inquest, or that comments were going to be made and the effect that would have. And so I would like to state here, and it be recorded on the Hansard, that I'm sorry, as a former Minister for Courts with responsibility for coroners, that wasn't done, and I'm pleased to see that those comments and those errors were made, and I'm pleased to see that there's been some seek to rectify that now. I'd also like to talk about suicide and the provisions around suicide reporting. The fact is that New Zealand has got a terrible record with respect to suicide. About 500 people take their own lives each year, and we know a lot about the statistics, and we know very, very little about the whys, and we raise a lot of questions about suicide and haven't sought necessarily hard enough, although there is some good work going on at the moment at the behest of the Prime Minister and his Chief Science Advisor, to find out more of the answers to questions we have around suicide. But, for instance, we know that of about the 500 plus suicides a year, about 100 of them are Maori, which is 4 times as many, for instance, as Pacific Island people who take their own lives, but we have no understanding of why that might be. We know, for instance, that about 1 in 5 are under the age of 25, and our youth suicide statistics in this country are among the worst, if not the worst, in the Western world, and we have no understanding really as to why in this country that we take huge pride in, that should be the case. We also don't necessarily understand why, for instance, those people in the lowest decile are just as represented as those people in the highest decile when it comes to income and social deprivation indexes, why they are equally represented. In fact, we know very, very little. When it comes to an investigation around suicide, the cause of death, which is what the coroner is chiefly charged with establishing, is frequently blatantly obvious, and having attended probably 100 suicides and several hundred sudden deaths, I suppose I speak with some experience, sadly, with respect to that. But to do some sort of psychological autopsy on what were the contributing factors, what was weighing on the mind of that person who took their life at the time they did, the various stresses and strains that come upon somebody that drives them to the conclusion that those they love would be better off without them there, is something we know very little about. And I would like to see us as a community have a very broad discussion around suicide and its causes. And I would also like to see authorities take a lead in implementing what has been come to known as a psychological autopsy into the issues that were weighing on the mind of the person that went on to take their life. I'd also like to pay respect to Sir Grant Hammond, who was the Law Commission's member who worked most and gave us advice on the reporting of suicide. We've had law around the reporting of suicide for some time. It's prevented most of what would most be of interest and helpful, not only to professionals but also to the public in the investigation or the understanding around suicide, and they've been prevented from being able to do that. And then there have been breaches that have been unable to be constrained as well. And the previous speaker, Pene Henare, made the point, for instance, that social media took over, breached all the laws around the publication of matters around suicide, and the mainstream media, which would have had some sort of integrity and credibility that could have been the vehicle for getting some facts out into the public domain, were prevented from doing so under threat of prosecution. So the advice that Sir Grant Hammond has given has been very, very helpful. I'd also like to pay respects to a group of South Taranaki people who have recently ridden the length of the South Island over the last week and raised $150,000 towards support of people affected by suicide. And this came out of a South Taranaki situation, or one of the women, Nicola Symes, who's very involved in the arrangement of this, lived in a community called Manatahi. Within her own family was affected by suicide of close relatives, including her husband, and then had grasped the nettle, raised the awareness. In this small community, within a 5-year period, there were about 6 different suicides of people, mainly from the farming community. You can imagine then, within the small community that only incorporates about 50 different farms, this is a huge effect on the local community. There has been some discussion around around recommendations and whether or not there should be mandatory responses. I have to say that this is something that we thought about long and hard. The problem was that various coroners have differing results, differing recommendations from similar deaths, and those recommendations frequently conflicted. If one looked, for instance, at the recommendations made around cycling deaths or around quad bike deaths, they conflict with each other quite frequently, and often the coroners making those reports went far beyond the facts surrounding the particular death that they were investigating. I have to say, and I know time is short, that I guess my main theme around this particular bill and what needs to happen with respect of coroners' matters in the futures is we need to sort the relationships out. There has been almost a toxic relationship between coroners and pathologists over the years. There has been some strife between coroners and police, the ability for coroners, for instance, to direct the police to make inquiries, which ran in conflict to the police's duties to prosecute matters, for instance. So effectively you had members of the judiciary being able to instruct the police to make inquiries, but members of the executive, such as the police minister, couldn't instruct the police to do absolutely anything. In the end, though, what we need to remember is this, that all of us, whether we be community members or people who have had a close association with these matters, such as myself as a police officer, then as a lawyer, over that time as a funeral celebrant, and then recently as a member of Parliament and a minister with some sort of responsibility, need to remember this. Who do we work for? We work for the public of New Zealand. They are the customers. Anything we can do to assist them in dealing with the tragedies that they're confronted with has to be good, and it is incumbent on us to do all we can. Thank you.